All right. Four of us are here, Kaitlyn, Liz, Alan, and I, to talk about the new world with good faith. And Alan starts with Elon Musk, a man of mystery that we're all trying to understand these days.
Elon Musk, man of mystery, man also on the hook for $45 billion to purchase Twitter, or was it 44 billion?
Which he doesn't seem to have.
Yeah, money he does not have because Tesla's share price has been going down precipitously. And even though he was the richest person in the world just a few months ago, I don't think he is anymore.
Really? I didn't know it was that bad.
I don't think he's doing too well at the moment. I haven't looked at the rankings lately, and I mean, Vladimir Putin's probably the richest man in the world anyway.
Well,
but
yeah.
According to the the Forbes rankings, he's probably slipped a few spots. Musk has.
Well, you know, Donald Trump showed us how easy it is to rig those Forbes rankings. But anyway,
that's true. But Musk is now alleging that, or I should, excuse me, let's get the facts right here. He's not alleging anything. He's just performing some due diligence currently because he is concerned about the number of bots on Twitter. And he feels that perhaps Twitter's management has not accurately represented the number of bots that are in use on Twitter. Which brings us to an article in the LA Times from mid-April, which is about a research paper from David Kirsch, a professor at the University of Maryland, about the role of bots on Twitter boosting Tesla and tweeting about Tesla. So I think that since Elon Musk is so concerned about bots on Twitter, we should take a closer look at the activity of some of these bots on Twitter and how they may in fact be benefiting Elon Musk and Tesla. Now, keeping in mind that this paper has not yet been published, so we don't know the contents of it, there are nevertheless some very interesting statistics from this paper, such as during a 10-year period that's examined in this paper, there were 1.4 million tweets from the top 400 accounts that posted the hashtag of $TSLA. And 10% of those were produced by bots. So that's a lot of tweets from bots. And then of the 157,000 tweets posted with the hashtag of #TSLA, 23% were from bots. Now, it's not unusual for companies to have bots tweeting about them on Tesla and about their share prices and such. This is a very common phenomenon. But what the researchers found was that companies like Google or Apple, those companies, yes, they did see a lot of bot activity. But unlike Apple and Google, when the Twitter bots were active, there was a corresponding increase in the share price of Tesla stock. Now, they're not necessarily arguing for causality here, but it is certainly an interesting pattern. And whereas Apple is an extremely profitable company that will likely continue to be extremely profitable with outstanding profit margins and incredible retail sales, Tesla is a car company, and manufacturing companies in general do not have great margins. Tesla does have better margins than, say, Ford and GM because there's such a big markup on their vehicles. Since they're a prestige item, a luxury item. Nevertheless, Tesla being valued at $1 trillion is simply bonkers. It's an unsustainable valuation because the company can never generate the kind of revenue and profits to justify that kind of valuation. Apple can, Google might, but Tesla can't. It's simply not possible unless they become like the world's only car manufacturer. Anyway, getting back to the study, there's no proof here that Elon Musk had any hand in the creation of these accounts or manipulated the accounts anyway. But it is interesting that he has benefited enormously from the use of Twitter bots. And so it's more than a little hypocritical for him to suddenly get very concerned about them and to potentially call off the deal just because of that.
Yeah. So a cynical person like me might say, Tesla is a meme stock. It's trading way above its fundamentals, and it's held up by bots. And the reason Musk thinks there's a lot of bots is they're probably his bots.
Hey, you said it, not me.
I did. And I also noticed that the number of bots they found trading about Tesla is the number that he imagined. He said, Twitter said there's only 5% bots, but I think there's 20% bots. That's what he said. I wonder where he got that number. So anyway, and also, the Twitter people have been popping champagne and saying, look, here was an explicit time available for him to do due diligence before he made that offer. He cannot do due diligence now and lower the bid. We're all going to get $54 a share, even though Twitter stock is way below that. They're expecting that big payday, and they have no interest in negotiating down. So Elon Musk has kind of painted himself into a corner here.
Yeah, I thought he already bought it. So
he promised to buy it, and then his stock fell, and he couldn't really raise the money, which is what everybody said beforehand, which, by the way, is also what they said when he said he was going to take Tesla private and raise $420 a share. He claimed he had the money, and he got in big trouble with the SEC because he didn't have the funding. And once again, he doesn't really have the funding. So he seems to be in a habit of pretending to have money he doesn't have, and then sort of trying to make up stories later about it. Kind of like Donald Trump.
He's got some money management issues. Even after getting rich off of the PayPal deal, he was running on fumes for a while there. And Tesla, for that matter, has nearly gone bankrupt a couple of times in the past 10 years.
Well, this is the thing. Even when people make a lot of money, they usually ramp up their lifestyle to where they feel broke again. And apparently there's no limit to that.
He apparently he enjoys feeling broke because that's what he keeps doing to himself.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's go on to Kaitlyn, who can save a lot of lives.
Well, not really. That's the gist of this article. So let me switch over to that for just a quick second. So this is the article by jalopnik.com, and it's by Aaron Marquise, and it's talking about cutting traffic deaths. And we can actually do that. So tens of thousands of people every year die from traffic accidents. And we can actually do something about it. And it's well known. We have the technology to do it. The problem is no one wants it. And this reminds me a lot of when they tried to install seatbelts in cars and people threw a complete connipshit over the idea, where they thought, my God, a seatbelt, you're restricting my liberties. You can't have seatbelts in cars. Nowadays, it's totally normal, and you wouldn't want to buy a car without seatbelts. But there are other technologies we have nowadays that can reduce traffic deaths by a lot. We could save tens of thousands of people a year. But once again, it's the same old, but, do we really want this? Because it's an inconvenience, like the seatbelts.
Well, you just gave me a great idea how we could save Tesla. Tesla could just sell cars without seatbelts, and he'll sell it to those Republicans he's trying to sell it to. They would love it.
I'm sure they would. So the article talks about a few technologies that should be standard, but are not. So the first one is the breathalyzer ignition interlock.
Oh,
yeah. And you can see why a lot of people might not like this, although they have ones where you don't have to breathe directly into the tube.
I'd like that a lot.
Yeah. But the idea is that your car will not start if you've had alcohol, which is such a no-brainer.
But it's also problematic because people who've had DUIs and had to get their cars fitted with those have just had a friend blow into it to start the car.
Yeah. So there are ways around all these, just like you can get around seatbelt interlocks, just like you can get around, and anything. There are ways around all these technologies, of course. You can have a friend blow into the. Why would you ride with someone who is drunk if you're sober? I don't know, but
Well, only evil hackers would do anything like that.
The kind of people that say, I'm not going to wear my seatbelt because I want to be thrown clear from the wreck if we get in a crash.
I've
Right.
heard that all my life from a lot of people. Another one I've heard a million times is, motorcycles are safer than bicycles. And a lot of people told me that.
I've
And
never heard that before, but
I
that's
heard it.
amazing.
I heard it from a lot of my students when I rode bicycle everywhere. They said, oh, that's dangerous. You should ride a motorcycle like me. And I just sort of look at them.
Yeah, so this is what the breathalyzer ignition interlock looks like. But like I said, there are ones where you don't have to blow into this tube.
Mhm.
So that would be that would save tens of thousands of lives a year. But of course, no one wants that. I do too. I think that'd be great, but no one wants it apparently. There's seatbelt ignition locks. So right now you can still start your car with your seatbelt not plugged in. It'll beep at you and make annoying noises, but you can still start the car. We can make it so the car won't start until the driver has their seatbelt on.
Mhm.
I mean, that's such a no-brainer. Once again, it's the same old argument of, and we saw this during COVID when people didn't want to take the vaccine. Like, oh my gosh, I'm going to get jabbed in the arm. I have to make sure that my seatbelt's on before I can start my car. I'm being oppressed. No one wants this. So we
That's
don't
right.
have it standard in every car. The other thing that's very interesting, and a lot of people I understand might be a little wary of this, is that there is a new technology called, and let me get this right here. It's to stop speeding. It is called, here it is. It's called the Intelligent Speed Assistance. Basically what it does is it monitors the speed of your car and it looks at what the speed of the road is. And if you're going over that speed limit, it'll slow the car down for you. I mean, it would save a lot of lives. It really would. It's very easy to go over the speed limit if you're not just like paying attention, even if you are trying to drive the speed limit. Sometimes the speed limit seems a little ridiculously low, but it's usually that low for a reason, even if it's not obvious to you as the driver. But we do have the technology. We could make it standard that you can no longer speed in your car and it would be cheap. But of course, drivers are not going to have it.
Well,
And so,
these are the things that I thought of years ago when I thought it'll be great when we have self-driving cars because all this stuff will be taken care of. But that does not seem to be what's happening.
yeah, that's what I was thinking of too. I thought self-driving cars would take care of all these issues all in one, except for the seatbelt thing. You should still wear your seatbelt even in a self-driving car. But the rest of these things, like the breathalyzer and the speeding and reckless driving, all that would be solved by self-driving cars. And that's what I think you bring up a good point, Sam, is because we really haven't been looking at these technologies because we are all sort of thinking that these technologies that I just discussed would be obsolete by now because we would have self-driving cars.
Because
But
we
of course-
believe people like Elon Musk that keep telling them they're going to be here like 5 years ago.
Right, exactly. So they're not here. And so we're living in a world where people still have to drive, but we have technologies now that could save tens of thousands of lives every year, which add up over decades. These are mothers and fathers and children. We could put these technologies into our cars, but like I said, there really needs to be that political will, and most people are just like with seatbelts, just like with the COVID vaccine, they just hate safety measures, and so.
I don't know that it's a matter of just hating safety measures. Like for me, for example, I'm not convinced that any of these measures that where you just talked about would actually be all that effective because we haven't had enough study on it. And, the speed limiters thing in particular, it's sort of like gun control, where if you're going to have the speed limiters, literally every vehicle on the road has to have the speed limiters. Like you can't have some cars with it and some cars without it because you may end up unintentionally creating more unsafe conditions that way, because there are times, due to the speed differential, for example, that you may have to temporarily exceed the speed limit to get out of the way of a dangerous situation, you know. So I think that some of these things seem really good on paper, but without more in-depth study, you know, I'm not really sure that they would be the panacea that they appear to be on paper.
So I'm really glad you brought that up, Liz, because I didn't mention this, but the article does mention lots of in-depth studies by the Nhtsa, which is the authority that does these studies, and these are their recommendations that the article goes over. And as far as having some cars with these and some cars not, I mean, the entire point would be to make these standard, so that nowadays you really can't get into a car without seatbelts. It would be the same thing, and you know, once they make these standards in 10 years, it'd be really hard to find a car without, you know, speed, without speed limiters, without a breathalyzer, ignition locks, and without seatbelt ignition locks. You're right. I think there would be a weird transition period, Liz, where things could get very complicated. But on the large scale, the research does show that these devices would save, you know, tens of thousands of lives. The issue is, of course, like I said, you'd have the car not be able to start until you plug in your seatbelt, and that can be really off-putting to a lot of drivers.
You know, you just have to market it correctly. The reason people don't want to do it is because you don't add something fun. So if you just added those things and then you also added like a machine gun to the car, then people would go for it.
Yep.
Anyway, nobody ever listens to my brilliant ideas. But anyway,
I mean, I always liked the speed racer car that has the thing where it can bounce off the ground.
yeah. And I like the James Bond car where it can make an oil slick and drop out caltrops and stuff, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
So anyway, Liz has the most important story of all. Hacking is now legal. We can hack everything.
Well, no, maybe not quite, but close. So it is a very exciting story. It was a piece in Bleeping Computer that came out yesterday, and it's regarding the U.S. Department of Justice has put out a statement that they will no longer prosecute folks for ethical hacking security research under this. So this is huge. This has been a major problem in the security research field since it's forever, and it's really very exciting news that you know, that our government is actually starting to take a look at policy and understand like that you really do need to break these things and find the vulnerabilities and actually be able to report them without fear of being thrown in the crossbars motel for an indeterminate period of time. So you know, they did make it clear that it's not going to give you a pass if you're hacking in bad faith to so that you can extort companies, and they'll still prosecute you under that. However, they did say that they would look at individual cases, you know, on a case-by-case basis to ascertain whether the hacker is actually being an ethical hacker or a malicious one. So that's pretty interesting.
And we can trust the Department of Justice at
Oh,
all times.
always,
Yes.
always. But I think this is actually a step in the right direction. I mean, you know, before there were no provisions for anything like this, and it was pretty bad. And the article actually goes on to mention that they also made some clarifications in policies regarding breaking terms of service, using different handles when you're on the internet, or using personal computers, work computers for personal purposes, which I maintain is always a bad idea no matter what, and you should just never do it if you can possibly avoid it. But I thought it was interesting that they closed out the article with a prominent example of a case that might not be prosecutable based on these new regulations was Aaron Schwartz.
Really? I thought
Yeah.
he was dead meat because he absolutely violated all that copyright. How could you call that good?
That's what I thought too, and they did not go on to clarify it, but since they did say that he was charged with exceeds authorized access violations, and so maybe in
Oh.
this case it
Well, it
would.
wouldn't be the CFAA. It would be the GMCA.
Yes,
Oh,
exactly.
so
Exactly.
he
And
just
that's
swapped from
more,
one fire
and
into
the
the other
DM,
fire.
right, and DMCA doesn't carry, so far as I understand, doesn't carry the threat of prison time, so
Oh, well, that would be a big
CFAA,
difference. Okay.
big difference. It's more of as I understand it, and I'm not a lawyer, but as I understand it, DMCA is more of a civil thing,
Yeah, it's just a
whereas
fine.
CFAA is criminal, yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, that makes sense then. Well, okay. So we can hack everything. When I went to see the head of the DOJ at B-Sides, and he came to my class, and I asked him this. I said, why don't we have a research exception? And he said, oh, no, they can never do that because all the momentum in the government now is to make it tougher on hackers and prosecute them more. And nobody has any interest in adding some kind of loophole because then all the bad guys will claim they're doing research and sail through it. So I'm amazed this happened because
Me
that
too.
sounded like a good argument. They said it'll never happen.
Yeah, but I think they're starting to understand that they were really shooting themselves in the foot with that, and especially it requires a ton of cognitive dissonance to maintain that position while you start having events like hack the Pentagon.
Well, I know that's why I think this is ultimately from the bug bounty programs.
Mhm.
Yeah, which I attribute mostly to Katie Mo. Katie Mo started it all and managed to convince these big square companies to just accept ethical hacking.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's great. All right. And so Sri Lanka continues to be in worst case. Sri Lanka has now defaulted on their debt for the first time ever, and they cannot pay for gasoline or oil anymore. And the people can't afford food. And a new awful thing, the same president that set up all that stuff, or prime minister, whoever it was, also decided to switch Sri Lanka suddenly to 100% organic farming, which it turns out is not what the farmers were doing. And the lack of chemical fertilizers has lowered their yield to 5% of what it used to be, to where they can't make a living off their farms anymore. So now they have a food shortage, in addition to a money shortage, by just abruptly jerking into the fashionable new world, which they were not ready for. And they've pushed out that prime minister and put in another, but all of his family members are still in power and they haven't pushed them out yet. And anyway, in the same vein, there's a warning on The Guardian saying that when the banks collapsed in America in 2008, there were people warning that the banking system was unstable because everybody was pushing the same kind of unsafe loans and they were all going to fail together. And they say this is now true of our food system. We're watching what happened with baby formula, where we only had about 2 or 3 suppliers. And when one of them has a problem, there's not enough available. And it's happened to automobile manufacturing and other things in our country because we switched to just-in-time production. So instead of having a warehouse full of parts, you count on always being able to ship in just enough parts at the right time. So if the supply chain has a problem, you're frozen. And apparently the same thing is true of our food supply. Our food supply is now in the hand of a small number of massive corporations that do the same thing. They make a fragile system to maximize profit. So it is very likely that it will slip and have a crash and create food shortages. So it might be nice to pay attention and shore it up before that happens. So I thought it's a very interesting argument. Anyway.
Or we could blame Biden somehow for some reason. I've seen a lot of people do that.
Well, now we can blame Biden, like with the baby food, for not seeing it coming and preparing for it in advance.
There we go.
But
that makes life so much easier. Where instead of having all these, complex sources of economic instability, we can just blame it on the president. You see?
Well, now of course, you then can go to the next step, which is claiming that Trump would have done it better, and that's where I really begin to have a problem.
Oh, but maybe Trump would have done it better. You don't know, Sam.
No, I guess you can't prove it, but somehow I think at least I wouldn't have to wear a seatbelt while it was happening if it was Trump in there.
Yes.
Anyway, and Alan has got the Democratic People's Republic of Korea.
Yes, also known as North Korea, and the Departments of Treasury, State, and Justice now have some advice on how to hire IT workers from North Korea.
This is
Or
something
more
somebody
accurately,
wants to do? Who wants to
how-
do that?
Well, I should say how not to hire IT workers from North Korea.
Okay.
Apparently, this is a real thing. Apparently, there are a number of DPRK or North Korean IT workers around the world that are getting hired either unknowingly by the employers or knowingly.
They're spies, I assume.
Well, that's the concern. Exactly. Is that they could be spies and that they are sometimes working in sensitive areas, and that also these workers are sending their paychecks to the government of North Korea. They're not actually keeping it for themselves. Even if they are working abroad from North Korea, they are more or less controlled by the government still, so they don't get to keep their own money.
Wow, I saw a documentary about guys who were sent to like Russia to do work in these logging camps to do the same thing. I had no idea they were doing it with IT workers too.
I saw that too. Yes, which is pretty bonkers. But I suppose you can make more money in IT than you can in logging. So
why does Russia want to infiltrate our logging industry?
No, these are North Korean workers at logging camps in Siberia.
Oh. Why are they doing that? Because it's nicer than North Korea, I guess.
Well, I don't think the workers have much choice in the matter.
Okay.
And they're not really getting paid. Their paychecks are going straight back to the North Korean government.
So this is how they're making money, by selling their citizens to be slaves in other countries.
Yes.
Okay.
You might go that far. Exactly.
And apparently here too, are they hiring North Korean IT workers here?
Yes, although they're not physically located here. And so this document, which is a rather lengthy document, 16 pages, goes through all the different tricks that the North Korean government is apparently using. Among them, simply sending workers to countries in like Southeast Asia and Africa, where North Korea has better relations, or using proxy workers who may or may not know that they are actually being used in this fashion, who are then hired by maybe American or European countries. And then these North Korean workers are doing legitimate work and possibly skilled work, but there's a long list of all the different types of work that DPRK IT companies are engaged in, such as mobile apps, building virtual currency exchange platforms, and cryptocurrencies. This is actually on the list.
Oh, what a good idea.
Yeah, also things more inane things like graphic animation and dating applications, online gambling programs. But, you know, you might want to hire some of these North Korean IT workers, because I am sure they know a lot about virtual currency exchange platforms and digital coins. I'm pretty sure they know what they're doing there.
That's the problem. They do.
Yeah.
Man. But of course, I assume they somehow fool you and you don't find out they're North Korean when you hire them.
Right. At least you'd better not know that. Otherwise, you'd be charged with evading sanctions against North Korea.
There's a whole section in here about how they hide their identity. That's quite detailed.
So they have
Yes.
some clues for you to use to detect when this is happening to you?
Yes, they've got pages of this, red flag indicators.
Okay.
Yeah, you want to
Red
watch the IP addresses.
Yeah, red flag indicator number 1, North Korean accent.
Yeah, well,
No, not necessary. That's not necessarily true if they're using the proxy workers.
yeah.
Oh, very true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If they're using Red Star, OS, it might be a
Yeah.
problem.
That would be a clue. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I wonder how many of them are actually working in famous companies and stuff. Well, anyway, so Kaitlyn has another cheerful fact about Meta.
Oh yeah, Meta is doing its thing still. This time, at least, they're not messing up their technologies. So The Verge has a article talking about abortion, which is everyone's favorite topic, of course. And so Meta sent out a memo to all the employees saying you cannot talk about abortion in the middle of this abortion ban. Now you might say, okay, maybe the company has a, let's not talk about politics at work policy. That's not the case at all. Meta encourages discussion of things like Black Lives Matter, LGBT rights, but for whatever reason, they said niet on abortion, which is very interesting from a feminist perspective, that you have this company that really wants to make workers feel included, that wants to have that supposedly encourages diversity and encourages topics like Black Lives Matter, like minority rights, LGBTQ rights. But when the topic of abortion comes up, even when it's under attack, even when it's intrinsically tied to women's rights, even in good faith, like I understand they don't want people screaming and yelling about how abortion is murder on their on their company page, but if workers at Meta are concerned about their abortion rights, suddenly they don't want the workers to talk about it. That's very interesting, and it really shows that women's rights are not as solved as we would like to think. Like it wasn't, women are well represented in the workplace nowadays, but there's still a long way to go towards, true equality. And this demonstrates that.
Do they explain why at all?
A little bit. So the people at Meta, the PR people, had quote unquote no topic. But it's let me read this quote. During an all hands meeting with employees Thursday, Meta's VP of HR, Janelle Gale, said that abortion was quote unquote the most divisive and reported topic by employees on Workspace. She says that even if people are respectful and they are attempting to be respectful about their view on abortion, it can still leave people feel like they're being targeted based on their gender or religion. So what I got from that is that there's a bunch of very staunch pro-life people who felt attacked, that there were all these people on the message board at work talking about how scared they are that Roe v. Wade is being overturned. And HR got involved.
Yeah, that makes sense. Brian Armstrong at Coinbase actually about a year ago said, all right, no politics at work, period. And that seemed to work. After a few people left, that people seemed to accept that. And that would seem like a more workable rule than this madness where some politics is okay and other politics is not.
Right. I would go even further. I would say that the best thing to do is to clearly define the political views of the company, and then say, hey, if you want to work here, we're pro-abortion, we're pro, gay rights, and just say, hey, if you want to express your opinion, that's fine. But you really need those kind of stances put up front if you're going to create a company that's going to be inclusive, right? Like you can't be like, we're not going to talk about politics, but we have an HR department that focuses on making sure that people aren't being discriminated against, because that's inherently political, like they're making a huge political statement and saying that we're not going to tolerate discrimination. Even if it is against the law and they could get sued, even still, they're still, like I said, you really need to make those policies clear. And I don't think it helps anyone to just not talk about these things. In the end, it does reduce drama in the short term, but in the long term, it perpetuates the status quo, and the status quo does include, discrimination. So,
well, I think in particular, Meta and all the big tech companies are now facing constant criticism from the right that they're blocking right-wing views, and they're also looking at a future when the right gets more powerful. And they wish they hadn't offended them so much. They're trying to they're trying to the impossible thing of appealing to both sides, like all the media companies are trying to do, like Newsweek's trying to do.
Right. You can't appeal to both sides.
Well, you used to be able to, like 40 years ago, you used to be able to have a newscast that would not offend hardly anybody, but it doesn't seem to be possible anymore.
Right. No, you like I said, it's best to clearly state the position of the company, and then these policies make a lot more sense. If Meta wants to be anti-abortion, pro-life, but maybe pro-LGBT, I mean, they should just make that clear instead of, making these nonsensical rules where some political topics are okay, some aren't. I mean, just,
Yeah. Well, I think this Meta has a real long history of just random arbitrary decisions, which I think come from Zuckerberg. Sort of like Elon Musk, he just has an idea and pushes it out, and that's the policy. There's not like a process of making careful decisions.
Well, that would make a whole lot of sense, given that the other political discussions affected men. But since this one does not really, I mean, there are a few men, but most men are not affected by the issue of abortion. It would make sense that Zuckerberg would not be interested in having this discussion at his business.
Yeah. All right. And Liz has got an IT admin.
Hi. Yeah. Wow. This was a pretty funny story. So this IT administrator in China was feeling really undervalued at his job because he kept making these security warnings and nobody would listen to him. And after a while, he just got a little too disgruntled and hosed four servers at this real estate brokerage that he worked at. So he got in some trouble for this, and definitely not a great idea.
What's the punishment in China? I'm thinking it might be pretty severe.
Well, according to this article, he got 7 years, which I'm pretty sure, I mean, I don't know, but I'm pretty sure that when you get 7 years in China, you do the whole 7 years and it's pretty unpleasant. So I mean, wouldn't recommend doing this. And he, like most people who commit a crime, that he thought that he had covered all of his tracks. He thought he was going to get away with this. He did not get away with it. He had he didn't even really hide his IP address, his MAC address, the very unique title that he had on his system. He left fingerprints and breadcrumbs everywhere.
Well, they could outsource that job to North Korea, probably get better work done.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Who knows? Maybe next time they'll try that.
Yeah. Well, anyway, I was very pleased. The voting on recalling Nhtsa Bodine is coming up soon in San Francisco, and the Atlantic has a good article, which I'd like to see because they explain it in much better detail. I've been hearing all these pro Nhtsa Bodine pieces from the local press saying he's wonderful and everybody should support him, and I'm pretty suspicious of that. And I know that the guy on the far right that I listen to podcast is pushing this, and this is a good article saying, first, it has the usual stuff that Democrats say about everything, that there is no increase in crime. You're just making it up, just like there was no inflation and stuff, which we know is not true because they're just looking at police reports that are not accurate. But then they say what Nhtsa Bodine did, and his thing was to not throw people in prison, but throw them in rehabilitation. But the rehabilitation programs under his watch have a lower population than they used to have, because he's just not an efficient organizer. And most of the lawyers under him have quit, saying he's just incompetent and he doesn't even show up for the meetings. So anyway, it's very interesting to read. His idea is an appealing, idealistic vision that we shouldn't just keep taking people and throwing them in prison where they just get more harmed and then they come out and commit more crimes. Instead, we should send them to these rehabilitation programs, of which there are a couple in San Francisco, but they're not big enough. They can't handle the load. The restrictions are too tight, so people can't get into them. So anyway, it looks like he's going to get recalled, I think. And then the mayor wants to just have a tough on crime policy of locking people up instead of just letting them go to offend again, which looks like where we're headed. And in the long run, it might be nice to have a better rehabilitation program, but there doesn't appear to be an option. Anyway, I was very pleased to see a complete article showing the whole story here. And then we're back to Alan, who has got a Melvin Capital.
Melvin Capital, a hedge fund on Wall Street, which people probably haven't heard about, except Melvin Capital was on the short end of the GameStonk incident when GameStop shot up from $18 to $300 all in like one day.
They were, everybody, all the amateurs in the game said, we are crushing the hedge funds. This is
That's
the hedge
right.
fund they crushed.
We're crushing the short seller hedge funds. Yeah. We're finally giving these greedy billionaires a taste of their own money. Well, Melvin Capital was the company, was the hedge fund on the other side of that trade. They were short selling GameStop, and now they are no more. They have just closed up shop. They've returned all their money to their investors, and that ends a footnote in the whole GameStop saga. Although it's an interesting situation because prior to GameStop, Melvin Capital was actually one of the most successful hedge funds on Wall Street. They were doing over 30% annualized returns, which is just exceptionally good. Yeah. And they made most of their money on successful short sales, where they essentially were betting against stocks. They were betting that the stocks would decline in value. And interestingly, not only did they short GameStop, but they also shorted Tesla.
That's what I was just wondering. If people at short Tesla would be sitting pretty right now.
Yes. Well, unfortunately, they didn't do it at the right time. They shorted it when Tesla was still going up.
Yeah.
And so this is another one of those facts that most people will have forgotten. Elon Musk was really pumping GameStop during the big run-up, because he was mad at Melvin Capital. He remembered that Melvin Capital had very publicly shorted Tesla. And so it all comes back to Elon Musk, really, when it comes to financial manipulations. But anyway, that's it for at least this one incident. And GameStop is still going strong. I think it's trading at like $80 a share, which is still a gross overvaluation because the company is going to go out of business. The business model is selling games and I guess game consoles through physical stores, brick and mortar stores. And you just don't need to buy your games at brick and mortar stores anymore. And you haven't needed to do that for quite some time.
I thought they diversified into crypto or something.
Oh, everyone's diversified into crypto, except me.
Yeah. Anyway, and Kaitlyn has got the Mars lander.
Well, kind of, not really. So firstpost.com has an article written by, I don't know who. It's a mysterious article written by the Associated Press. and anyway, so it's talking about the InSight lander. Is there an image of the InSight lander? No, there's not. So I'll go back to my camera. So the InSight lander was, as the name implies, a lander that landed on the surface of Mars, and it was not a rover. So it just sits there and it basically does seismic activity, and it looks at Mars quakes and looks at the tectonic activity on Mars. And it was powered by some very large solar panels off to the sides of the machine. I think there's like 2 main solar panels arrays. And well, it's getting covered by dust. And they were hoping, I guess the engineers were hoping that dust devils would come and sort of clean off the panels periodically. But that just does not seem to happen. There were several dust devils that came by and sort of blew stuff around, but it didn't actually clean off the solar panels. So this is actually going to be the second lander on Mars that has been lost to dust on the solar panels. So moving forward, I think either NASA is going to have to come up with a way to clean off the solar panels over time, or switch to nuclear power, which is what they're doing for a lot of the roving devices. But it looks like InSight's days are numbered. So when it first landed, it could apparently run, it had enough solar power that it could run an equivalent oven on Earth for like 1 hour and 40 minutes. There's so much dust on the panels nowadays that it would have trouble running it for like 10 minutes. It's that far gone, and it's only getting worse. So
they need windshield wipers.
something like that. I mean, you would think that they would have thought of something to clean off the dust, because this is a known problem on Mars, that dust gets on everything. But I guess they were sort of hoping that dust devils and stuff would just sort of take care of it. It did not.
Yeah.
But who knows? Maybe there will be some sort of giant storm that'll clean it off in like 2 years, and then suddenly it'll wake up again. But we'll see.
Yeah. All right. And Liz has people paying the ransom.
Yeah, this article appeared in VentureBeat the day before yesterday, and it was covering a study conducted by Kaspersky. So take that with a grain of salt. But it's pretty believable. They published this report where they'd done some surveying of IT executives across the country, and 88% of around the world, 88% of the respondents said that who were previously attacked by ransomware said that they would just choose to pay if they had another attack. And that companies who'd already been attacked and paid in the past, 97% said they were just willing to pay up again.
Yeah, they put it at the right price point. This is what I hear from people in the industry. You just pay, forget it. That is the cheapest way to solve the problem.
Yeah, I mean, it's just amazing. This was not, I wouldn't have expected it to be that high, but the numbers back up what the anecdotal story we've been getting from people.
Yep. So logically, if you believe Adam Smith, they should raise the price on the ransomware. But anyway.
Yeah.
Right. And the last one here is an article from Reuters about Tether. And they're explaining how we just had the crash of the fourth largest stablecoin in cryptocurrency, which caused a huge ripple through the whole crypto marketplace. And Tether lost its peg briefly. And if Tether goes down, everything will go down. It's the one they're all trusted in. And it's an extremely shady company, and they don't really have the reserves. And this has some really disturbing issues. They're supposed to have $1 reserve for every Tether that's out there, but only 49% of their reserves are in liquid assets. The rest are invested in ways they can't get them quickly. And right now, people are pulling money out of Tether at the rate of $1 billion per day. And therefore, their 43 billion of liquid assets could, in theory, be exhausted in a little more than a month. So it does appear that in a month or two, Tether might crash. And if Tether crashes, I think that will be much, much worse for the whole crypto ecosystem, because it's all based on Tether. And it's all based on people trusting Tether. And there is no reason on earth to trust Tether. The history of the people that formed it is terrifying. And this is why, just like Tesla, just like GameStop, all these things are just floating on air. There's nothing actually holding them up except general enthusiasm from people that believe in this stuff for no apparently good reason, which, by the way, you could say the same is true of fiat currency. But anyway, it looks grim for the future of the cryptocurrency industry on the Tether score, at least. Anyway, well, that's it for this one, and we'll be back on Tuesday.